All right. Well, this is going to be exciting, ladies and gentlemen. We're here for a nice bonus broadcast. I am joined right now by my good friend, Timothy Gordon. We're bringing him in. Tim, you there?
Yo, I'm here.
What is going on, Tim? Well, we are here. We are here to talk with Charles Coulombe. We're going to bring him in just a second, but this is a special wrap-up broadcast for the book club, Windswept House, Malachi Martin. We got questions for a man who knew Father Martin, and man, oh man, I am excited to do this. We've been waiting a couple of weeks to get this on the books, and here we are, Tim. So how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling excited.
Oh, yeah. Both of you guys. Well, hello, Tim. Hello, Charles. Go ahead. How's everybody feeling?
Back in the States. Tim, you talk, not me.
Charles, good to see you, man. You're back in the States. I'm great. I'm excited to be talking to you about Father Martin.
It's interesting man, and I didn't know him all that long because he didn't live. I guess I know him about 7 years, maybe, or 8. But you'll hear all about that in due course.
Well, that's what I wanted to start with, Charles, and it was great to talk to you a little bit beforehand. It's amazing to see how much we have in common, especially some of your roots over here in New York, and a lot of familiar places that we held in common and all that. But this is another thing, because the work of Father Martin has been really something I've been so enthralled by a long time. For a long time, I still listen to all of his 7 appearances on Art Bell's radio show from the 90s almost weekly. It's just something I pass the time with. I just love the conversation there. So the first thing I'd like to ask you, because it seems like you knew him during the years that he was making those radio appearances, what were the circumstances that led to your meeting Father Martin?
Well, my first book, Every Man Today Called Rome, initially E.T. Called Rome, until the wrath of Spielberg altered the name. It came out in 1987, and somehow or other, Father Martin got a copy of it, and so he wrote me a letter, and he said, "When you're in New York next, please come see me." So I did, and this was an interesting meeting because he lived with a Greek shipping family called Livanos. The reasons for which he explained to me, which I'll explain to you. And this is kind of important to know because a lot of people enjoy scandal. As my late father used to say, people who are easily scandalized generally enjoy it a whole lot. And I found this to be the case while I knew him. Inevitably, people would bring up certain things, which I happened to know the other end of, and, bring them to me with a great outrage. My personal favorite was the priest who said to me, "You know, he lives with a Filipino woman." And I said, "Yes, I do. I've met her. She's the maid."
Wow. Because we get a lot of that. I know that Tim wanted to talk a little bit about that too. I sure did. And just for everybody's background, because we've been talking about you a little bit on my show and prepping what this conversation was going to be about. You are a historian. You are a writer, and you, of course, now we know this is how you cross paths. It was actually through your writing. What was the subject matter of the book that you wrote in 1987 that caught the attention of Father Martin? What was the subject matter? I forget.
Well, what it was basically, it started out, frankly, as a letter to my classmates in high school when I realized that I was the only one who still went to Mass. So you got to bear in mind that in those far-off days, there were no Tridentine Masses to speak of in most places. There just weren't. People forget how far we've come from then.
Yeah.
I realize a lot of the members of the hierarchy, a lot of them would like to return us to the 70s. I tell you what, I'm going to wear double-knit bell-bottoms before I do that. But nevertheless, that was the way it was. It was as far as the faith went, it was a very, very dark time. In many ways, darker than it is now. Well, anyway, I digress. So I found that I was the only one who went to Mass, and I understood why that was. And my book actually started out as a letter to them to explain why our generation lost the faith. And it got bigger and bigger. And then I heard of a group of laymen who were putting together a press to bring out unusual Catholic stuff. So I said, all right, fine, this is unusual. I sent it to them, everything it would be published and what it was. So I wrote it actually when I was 24. It came out when I was 27. And as I say, someone or other gave it to Father Martin. He read it. And when I came out next, I saw him. So he invites me to meet him at his home. And this was a large brownstone style apartment, townhouse apartment, a couple of stories, owned by the Shipping family. And they had an original El Greco over the fireplace. You don't see those very often in private homes.
So he was
not ones I go to.
Living like a baller, huh?
Well, indeed. And he explained the whole story to me, and I guess I might as well explain it to yourself and your listeners. When he wanted to leave the Jesuits, he was in New York, and he talked to Cardinal Cook, who was his great patron. And he said to Cardinal Cook, look, I don't want to be laicized, I don't want to leave the priesthood, but I am leaving the society. What do I do? I mean, I doubt I'd be very useful as a parish priest. So Cardinal Cook the first thing he said was, I'm going to have to get an apartment. Cardinal Cook said, no, you don't. I said, what do you mean? If you live by yourself, no matter what you do, you're going to be a source of scandal. If you live by yourself, it will be irreparable. I'll find a family for you to live with. And he did, the Lamanoi. So that was how he came to live with them. Oh, yes, and the Filipino maid.
Wow.
Filipina. I want to be, specific here.
That's interesting. We have to get you with a family. If you live on your own, you're going to be subject to temptation and just...
Temptation, and also people will whisper. There'll be gossip.
Mm.
If the delivery boy brings pizza, guess what? Everybody will know you're having an affair.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Right.
So, it spared him one kind of scandal, and of course opened him to another. But, as I say, people who are easily scandalized generally enjoy it a whole lot.
Yes, so, we're seeing that a lot these days, yes. Okay, continue. I'm sorry.
Well, not at all. So from that time on, when I informed him a second edition of the book was coming out, and he volunteered to give a blurb, which he did. If you see the second edition of the book, there it is. I got to know him. I mean, I saw him maybe 4 or 5 times. I talked to him on the phone many, many times. One of the interesting things, and this I really have to bring up, because whatever else anybody wants to say about him, this is for me kind of the price of admission. As you might imagine, through my book, I got to know a lot of younger people. And this one black kid here in California who had read himself into the church and then encountered my book, contacted me, and we got to know each other a bit. He wanted to go to USD, the University of San Diego. He didn't have any money. I mentioned this in passing to Father Martin. He never met the kid, and he paid his 4 years tuition.
Wow. That's incredible.
He never met him. So it's not even as though, as the wicked-minded would think he might get something out of it. He never met the kid. In fact, it may very well be that he particularly did not meet the kid for just that reason.
Yeah.
Tim, do you anything you want to jump in on, Tim?
You told me that story once, Charles. That's amazing. So where does this fit into is it unjust allegations that the journalist made against Father Martin regarding philandering with his wife? Do you buy that? And did that ever come up with him?
It never came up, but I'll tell you what did come up. Now remember, the philandering was supposed to have gone on during the time that he was a Jesuit.
Right.
Now this is a very, very important thing to understand about Malachi Martin. His life breaks into two pieces: liberal Jesuit and the rest of it. I say the rest of it because you wanted to find it for yourself. Now, what he said to me about his own past was this. He said he was a typical garden variety liberal Jesuit. Now, bear in mind that could mean a lot of terrible things back then.
Yeah. Still could mean a lot of terrible things.
Covers a multitude of sins.
Yeah.
And certainly I wasn't his confessor. But put yourself in the mindset for a minute of the kind of people who didn't have a problem with Karl Rahner having a mistress, or he and this other fellow at Vatican II vying for her affections, as expressed in who'd get to offer Mass in her apartment. This is kind of a really weird, bizarro clerical culture they had at that time. And I can't comment on it except that to this day, of course, I wonder how a priest can do all sorts of things and without seemingly any problem then offer Mass. Oh well.
Anyhow, the 70s. It was the 70s.
It was the 70s. Mistakes were made. When the Holy Father went on about ignore Grandma's lace, my immediate thought was, Holy Father, tell you what, stop wearing her polyester vestments and stop acting like her hairdresser. How about that? Anyway, sorry, just a little bit of a rant there, a rantlet. Anyhow, as luck would have it, he had already begun his career as a writer and was making money at it, was doing well. And then he was going to write a book debunking exorcism and showing it up for the fraud it must undoubtedly be, since we all know such things can't possibly happen in this modern world. Well, he went on several exorcisms. And that was the beginning of his conversion.
Wow.
Because the most disturbing thing for him, as you can imagine, was the possessed person's ability to call out the unconfessed mortal sins of the viewer, of the witnesses. That really shook him up. Because you see, if the devil is literally true, if all that stuff is literally true, then maybe the rest of it's true too, about God and the Trinity and the Blessed Sacrament and all the rest of it. And that was really the beginning. Of course, the book totally changed. It became Hostage to the Devil. And from that time, you don't see an immediate change. You see a gradual change in this work over several years. The first one of his books that I actually read was in '78, The Final Conclave, which happened to come out about the time that Paul VI died. And there, you could still see traces in opinions of the liberal he had been. But as time went on, these became less and less and less and less. And as you read his earlier books, you can almost follow the progression. He's sort of working it all out, as it were, on paper. What's interesting to me also, he wrote a novel called Vatican, which was interesting because it was basically a fiction about the post-Vatican II era. And it's worth reading. But the funny thing was, I recognized the villains. But the hero, it seemed to me, was an amalgam of several different people, including the late lamented Archbishop Elko. And I finally asked him about it. I said, was Archbishop Elko one of the inspirations for the hero? And he says, one of three. I said, Father, it's a pretty terrible time we live in when you can pull your villains right out of the street, but you got to really work to construct your hero.
Yeah. I know. I talk about that a lot with Timothy when we were talking about even some recent releases in the entertainment world that are pretty popular. We talk about the whole where people draw from antagonists and how the protagonists are pretty limited. what's going on here? I mean, and I think that's the biggest thing about Windswept House that we were always wondering about was we know now these decades later after the 1996 publication how the next several decades of history played out, so we know what's possible and what isn't. But at the same time, we're always wondering where's the accounting of the warriors of the light here, because we can see the wicked everywhere, and that plays out very easily in the news. We can see it; it's just running rampant. You just wonder, when are we going to catch a break? And that's just it's incredible that you're still talking about that years ago.
Well, first and foremost, remember a couple of things. One is that while good is ultimately more powerful than evil, evil tends to be louder and flashier at any given moment. Number one.
Speaking of flashy, Charles, the lamp behind you is throbbing, and
it sure is.
It's a little distracting. I was wondering.
I don't know what to do about it. Unfortunately, my nephew, this wreck is actually my home that my nephew and cousin have been living in while I've been gone, and everything is hooked up to the computer.
Okay, it's like Close Encounters of the Third Kind right now. I feel like they're trying to send me a message.
I know. All I could do is say, "Hey Google, turn off the light." I can't get it to moderate it. My nephew isn't here to do anything. So.
Okay. Well, we'll get through it. As long as your sound is great. Where were we? Timothy, were you on a certain track that you were leading toward with the questions? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just wondering. This is something you and I were trying to sort through, Frank, as we went week to week. Charles, when Father Martin would say this book, Windswept House specifically, is fact fiction, the next question that any reasonable viewers or listeners' mind is like, okay, what portion fact and what portion fiction? I did a show recently on Windswept House on my channel, and it was like, so much of it, the most important stuff seems to be on the fact side, not the fiction side. I mean, he's making allegations, which I wouldn't say this if some of the Sunk Island Mafia members were alive still, for defamation charges, but he's making allegations that with a very slight shift in the nomenclature of the names of the villains of murder, rape, things like that. Did you ever get to ask him what portion of Windswept House was fact and what portion was fiction?
He said about 4/5 was fact.
4/5.
That's heavy duty.
That's heavy duty.
But you got to bear in mind that in his for a period there, he was kind of in a certain sense, sort of a society priest, and he brought several people back to the faith or into the faith amongst the glitterati. Now, you may remember, or you may not, but early 80s, late 70s, something like that, there was a congressman, I think the name was Jenneret, from South Carolina. And he and his wife had a very messy breakup. And part of the whole breakup process was her posing nude in Playboy. I mean, it was a real mess. Well, he apparently was the one who brought her into the church afterwards, because she quickly faded from view, as people do, and then had to live with the results of what she had done, if that makes sense. He said something to him that was very interesting. She told him that she had encountered devil worship in some of the higher echelons where entertainment and politics meet. And she recounted being at a Hollywood party, and she noticed that people were passing something around. And she wasn't quite sure what it was. Well, finally, it came away, and it was a golden phallus. They were kissing it. So she made her side leave the party. So here's the problem you have anywhere at any time in history. In darkness, depravity grows. And remember that all of us human beings have on one side a yearning for the truth and on the other a spiritual death wish. It's the gift of our first parents of the fall. And any one of us, I mean, you think of the Epstein parties, that have been so exciting. One woman goes to prison for it and none of the attendees. That's interesting. But when you have a lot of money and you have a lot of power, it's a huge temptation to give in to the worst side of yourself. I mean, stop and think about it. If you or I or any of the three of us could do or say or have anything we wanted with no apparent threat of repercussion, we'd be monsters. We'd be absolute monsters. Fortunately, poverty, ties of family, all kinds of other things keep us from being faced with that kind of temptation. And that's why, parenthetically, someone like Blessed Emperor Karl is such an amazing character. Yep. Because he had all that and came out of it a saint. Mind you, he had a lot of adversity too. We don't know what would have happened if they'd won the war, but still, especially considering his father's lifestyle, it was amazing he turned out the way he did. Well, having said that, this is true in the state and it can be true in the church, especially for churchmen who are willing to compromise their office with the great ones of this world.
Charles, it's a sidetrack, but the Masons contacted Blessed Karl directly and they said, we're taking out your power. You'll be the last sovereign aside from the Vatican See, right? In 1918 or so?
1918.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
He had a... They were gunning for him, and so was our President Wilson. At the end of the day, the reason why Kaiser Karl lost his throne, and ultimately the reason why he died, was because of our beloved president. Fortunately, he brought segregation of the District of Columbia and the Federal Reserve and changed the Senate and did all kinds of fun stuff for everybody.
Right.
So it wasn't just Kaiser Karl who received his benevolence. So did the rest of us.
I'd love to get it because now we're getting into that other area, just sticking with Father Martin and also that time of the 20th century. It makes me think about something else that's really big about Windswept House in particular. Did he ever confide anything in particular regarding the third secret of Fatima to you, or the warning mentioned in Garabandal? Anything like that?
No.
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 Did you ever speak generally about it?
Very generally about the nature of prophecy and how very often you don't really know what it means until it occurs. In other words, well, I remember we were discussing Fatima one night. And Fatima, it's a very interesting prophecy, not just because we're discussing the first and second secrets, not the third. And he pointed out, well, this was certainly amongst the clearest prophecies we ever had. This war will end, but if mankind doesn't improve, etc., there'll be another and worse war that will break out in the reign of Pius XI. But notice something. There was no Pius XI at that time, of course. It was Benedict XV who spoke. And who knew when there would be a Pius XI? But Pius XI came to the throne in 1922. That war broke out in 1939, the last year of his pontificate. So a lot of people knew the Fatima message then. If in 1922 he had come to the throne and you said, oh my gosh, the next war is coming, got to hide out in the hills. Well, you'd have been sitting there until 1939, which really would not have been very helpful for you, your soul, or anybody else's. So the thing about prophecy is that it reminds us of several things. One, God is in charge. It can give us a general indication and some hope. But of course, inevitably, what people forget are the messages of repentance that come with the prophecies. And even in the case of Fatima, it says, in time my immaculate heart will triumph and there'll be a period of peace. Notice she doesn't mention the end of the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All she says is that there'll be a terrible tribulation. We'll go through it somehow or other. And then there'll be a period of peace. And then what? Next chapter of the world's history, presumably.
But do you ever speak to Martin about Akita, which is kind of Fatima too? That speaks more apocalyptically.
It does. It does speak much more apocalyptically. But again, as with Pius XI, timing is never exact.
Yeah.
And that is the same with La Salette. The timing, you just can't tell. And again, I always remind people, and I think Father Martin would agree, for the vast majority of us, the biggest thing about any given prophecy is to zero in on the penitential and devotional aspects. Those are what will get us through. Remember, let's remember one thing. We're all going to die. Everybody dying. Nobody gets out of here alive, in the words of that great theologian, Jim Morrison, or Jim Cardinal Morrison, as he's come to be known. But seriously, nobody does get out of here alive. And no matter what you do, there's only so much you can do for your future in a temporal sense. There's just no way around it. The best way to prepare for the coming horrors, whatever they may be, is your spiritual life. Frequenting the sacraments, the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, the prayers and devotions. You can't say it often enough.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean there's no importance to the prophecies. The prophecies are there to underline the importance of the actions prescribed, not the other way around.
Yeah.
When I was in, my confessor when I was in high school was James Francis Cardinal McIntyre, who was the then retired Archbishop of LA. And at the time, there was a fellow called Hal Lindsey, who was a Protestant minister, and he came out with a book called The Late Great Planet Earth. And in those years, we're talking about 1974, 75, a lot of apocalypticism. Of course, here in LA, we're always living on the edge of the apocalypse, the big one that's going to sink the city into the sea. But I asked the Cardinal, I said, what do you think of all this? He said, well, look, the world is going to end sooner or later. We have that of a certainty. No man knows the day nor the hour. It may happen in your lifetime. It may not. But here's the thing. Your world is going to end. We know this within a few decades. If you're ready for the end of your personal world, that is to say your own death, then you'll be ready for the end of the world if it comes in your time, as it may.
It's such a commonsensical thing to consider that right there, and it's the first time I've ever heard that articulated.
Well,
but Charles, how about this though? This is the other side of it, and that's insightful and all, but like Father Martin describes in more than one book the end of the pontificate. The pontificate has always been a sort of basic unit of measurement over the last 2,000 years anyway of human history. So how are we to, and it's such a big theme in Windswept House, the end of the pontificate. How are we to make heads or tails of the end of the pontificate without thinking of it, at least quasi-apocalyptically,
Well, no, I'm not saying you shouldn't.
Yeah.
But don't be disappointed if the apocalypse doesn't happen in your time.
Yeah.
No, I know. Did this ever come up, though? Like, Father Martin, with all due respect, what the hell do you mean? What does it mean if the pontificate ends? Is that the end of human history, or is that like a...
You see, it's very difficult, frankly. Keys of His Blood. Keys of This Blood was a book that in some ways I think he considered more important. And that gave us a future that, so far as I can tell, didn't happen. The great thing he expected to occur in 2000, John Paul II.
What was that specifically? I haven't read it. I've just had it.
He wasn't too specific. He thought there'd be some great, marvelous change for the good. Well, that was 22 years ago. So, I mean, you've got to bear in mind that while he was a scholar, a very, very smart man, and I think, certainly when I knew him, a very good one, I don't know that he had any particular insight into the future. I mean, let's put this another way. If you're very good at figuring out trends, you can appear prophetic. I made the comment on my own podcast a few years ago that the fragility of our current civilization would be tested by a world pandemic. I had no idea COVID was coming, but I knew, given what I know about the way our global system works, that a real pandemic, and not this thing, I mean a good Black Plague or something, would really throw us into a monkey wrench because the civilization has become so weird and complex. It'd be a real problem. Well, I had all sorts of people ask me, how did you know? The answer is I didn't. I had no idea. But I did know that the system that we have, if tested in that fashion, would have a lot of problems.
I can see.
Sorry?
No, I see what you're saying there about being able to just take the factors that are here presented on the table, knowing what you know about human nature, the human condition, and also geopolitical alliances and industrial realities. It's very easy to predict the future if you understand what drives all this, and it's pretty much human intention. Market forces is pretty much what's the ambition of humans. What is that? What drives them in an open marketplace or a closed one at that? So you can make a lot of predictions and be right.
You can, and it doesn't mean that you've got any particularly spiritual insights. It just means you know how life works, given what you've got. And of course, garbage in, garbage out. The less you know, the less your predictions will work. And again, they're never perfect anyway, because they're always, firstly, there's the divine will. And he often throws curveballs, thank God. I say thank God because I believe if life was purely the result of human intention, it would be hell on earth. But fortunately, it's not, because he does things from time to time. Everything from raising up people to unexpected events. And that is, as I say, what makes life livable.
Yeah.
Who expected a man like J.R.R. Tolkien to be produced by the trenches of World War I?
But Charles, isn't there a risk, a danger of being too dismissive of the fact that Father Martin had access to the third secret of Fatima? I mean, it was anointed in the sense of being it was set aside from all the other prophecy, in the last 600 years of apparition. It was set aside, couldn't be shared until 1960. He was one of the glitterati who had access to it. And I don't think we've talked about this before. I don't think you're dismissive of that, but we don't want to only read the sort of natural calculability of.
No, and as I say, I'm not applying that. Listen, I'm not dismissing it at all.
Yeah.
But I don't know the circumstances, and he certainly didn't tell me, under which he saw the secret. I know he saw it. I don't know. He didn't discuss with me then. I didn't ask him. If he felt like sharing, I'm sure he would have. But he didn't. So,
well,
I can only. What's that?
Charles, I want to ask you something, because it's 2:41 now, and I definitely don't want to take much more of an hour away from you, and I have other things I want to do, so I want to get at least two more big things in here from me, and that is, number one is his death. This is another thing that has a lot of speculation. A lot of people think it's very, very suspicious. Nobody knows how was he how did he die? Was he in the middle of an exorcism when it happened? Was it demonic in spirit, in nature? How this trauma at the end of his life was caused? Obviously, at this point, you probably weren't talking to him on the phone. You were probably just reading the news like everybody else. But did you have any conversation that would give you some insight into what he may have thought was coming for him eventually?
None.
Okay. None. When you heard the news, what did you speculate at all? Did you think what could it be, or is it just mourning the loss of a friend?
It was both. I mean, I knew he'd been having a few health problems, but I wasn't expecting him to die when he did. And with a man like that, knowing what he knew and the kinds of people he knew, or knew may not be the right word, the kinds of people he was aware of, you couldn't help but wonder. But I really have nothing to add to. I don't know any more than anybody else. One thing you have to bear in mind too is that everything that had happened in the church, and some of which, of course, was on the wrong side, when he was younger, weighed on him very, very greatly. He had he was jolly when you met him, but he had a bit of a haunted manner. I remember he said to me once, if you're going to dine with the devil, you need a long spoon. It's an old Irish saying, but he'd been through a lot of different things and experienced things that most of us do not. And I suspect it took its toll. Now, frankly, I would not be surprised by anything that was uncovered. If it turned out he did die in the middle of an exorcism, I wouldn't be surprised. Not in the slightest. If it turned out he'd been done in by mafia, I wouldn't be surprised. If it turned out that he just had a heart attack and keeled over, I wouldn't be surprised either. In a lot of ways, and I want to say, I don't mean this word in a pejorative in any sense of the word. But in a lot of ways, Father Martin was an adventurer of a type we rarely produce anymore. He saw a lot of strange and amazing things. He played a important and supporting role in some of the worst adventures of the church in the 20th century. I can't help but wonder a lot today what he would make of Pope Francis, because certainly I don't know that he would have imagined, the man who wrote Keys of This Blood might have had a very hard time imagining this. One other thing too, I should mention about prophecy. Remember too that, as Our Lady has said at various places, the terrible things can be ameliorated by our doing the devotional stuff. Prophecy is not written in stone. Remember that one of the reasons the church forbids fortune telling is that it interferes with free will. And each of us has that wonderful gift of free will that we can use to pray, to do penance, to avert the disasters predicted. Or not. How do I put this? You don't want to be dismissive of prophecy at all. But you see, what you tend to find people going in one of two directions. They dismiss prophecy and it's all about leading a good life, or they dismiss leading a good life and it's all about prophecy. And you know the sort of person I mean. The trick is to avoid either one. Anytime you feel yourself flagging in the practice of your devotional life, remember the prophecy. And anytime you're tempted to despair because of the horrors of the prophecy, remember your devotional life. Because you've got a chance to contribute to the averting of those horrors. And even if it doesn't, it contributes to you saving your soul. And I guarantee you, if we save our souls, all of this will be like a bad dream.
I love that outlook. It goes back to, once again, what you were saying before about the end of the world and the end of your world, losing track of those very, very necessary to remember and to grasp points of view. This is another one right there, because I talk about this on a nightly basis when we discuss the news. Everybody's and myself too. I'm a junkie for it. I love reading about conspiracy theory. I love talking about doomsday scenarios and this and that, and trying to pick up new pieces to a puzzle we haven't found before. And it feels like even though you haven't left your house, you're Indiana Jones, and you're there on the front line of something very special. But the other thing that I keep Post-its around me to keep myself focused is, you've got to be able to walk away from this, and you have to live your life. Every day, you cannot give up willingly any day of your life, because you're not getting that one back. It's just really it's really interesting to have to find a way to balance all that out. Tim, do you have anything else that you want to help me close with Charles here? This has been fantastic.
Yeah, as a parting shot, Charles, thanks for doing this. Frank, as always, thanks for doing it. I guess just my parting shot question would be, on the cusp of what you said about Father Martin's speculative view of what Francis would have been. I mean, to tie it to the question of his death, I mean, he was writing about 5 or 6 of the supposed kingmakers in the so-called Sankt Gallen Mafia that are named or almost named characters in Windswept House. And again, he's naming them as some of the worst villains there. So it almost, when I read Windswept House, which was late, I'd meant to read it for 10 years. I only read it with Frank the last couple of months. I thought, I'm glad I read this in the 10th year of the Francis pontificate, because not to impute to Father Martin like superhuman powers, but it really seems like he knew something like a Francis pontificate was coming by knowing the guys who gave him Francis, like Achille Silvestrini, who's kind of the ultimate villain, even more so than Cardinal Bernardin in the action. So
that's quite possible. I mean, as I say, I wouldn't be surprised. You remember the priest in Wisconsin?
Yes.
Had a dossier on all of the non-binary clerics in his diocese, and he's killed, and the only thing stolen are the files. Well, as I say, it would not surprise me. I just can't pretend to knowledge I don't have.
Yeah.
It you know, the other thing, too, you've got to bear in mind, I should say this because it may go on record as part of his canonization process, that I was actually present at a miracle that occurred with Father Martin.
Okay. Well, this is, let's hear about this.
Well, I hope you're seated. In fact, I can tell you both are, so you can survive this maybe. All right. I was in New York one night, and I went out with Father Malachi Martin, the late lamented Father Paul Wickens of St. Anthony's in Orange, a traditional priest of some renown in Jersey, and the equally late and equally lamented Dr. and Mrs. Timothy Mitchell, who ran Pro Ecclesia in those days. So we all went out to dinner at the Barbizon Hotel. And we had a great dinner. The conversation was wonderful. The wine flowed. The food was great. And then the meal ended. The two priests fought over which of them would pick up the bill.
Is that the miracle?
Yeah.
I was waiting for it. You told me that one before, and I fell for it halfway through again. Then I was like, "Damn it, he's doing the Bill thing."
Yeah, I mean, what's gonna happen is he's gonna make a pile of Svoyadel show up out of nowhere. What's gonna happen? Oh, it's a check. I get it. No, that's fantastic.
No, I mean, think about this: 2 priests fighting over who gets to pay for layman's dinner.
Should count. Should be one of 2 canonization criteria.
Yeah.
And you know, Padre Pro was beatified shortly after that. I always wondered if that might have been one of the miracles attributed to him.
This is true. You know, we three should do something like this again one day. I really have enjoyed meeting you and speaking with you, Charles, and it's great to have been able to ask these questions. I know obviously there's only so much you can do not being inside of Father Martin's head, but the fact that you guys were friends, and I'm sure there's so much more we can draw out of you, and not just necessarily on this topic, but things in general. I really enjoyed this so much, and I'd love for you to plug some of your work. Tell everybody where they can find your books. If you still do your podcast, let everybody know where they can find you there. That would be wonderful.
All right, I can do all that. Well, one other thing I should mention, though, about Father Martin, it's very important. As you may have guessed, I've got rather a jocular personality. So did he. And a lot of our time together was joking and, telling stories and all that kind of thing. We had a very good time. It was very good company. And believe it or not, in the midst of all of these other things, that's an important point to make, because he was fun to be around. It was just a lot of fun. And if there's any quality to him that is easy to forget because of everything else, it's that one. And it shouldn't be forgotten.
Wonderfully said. Wonderfully said. And where can people find your work, Charles?
All right. Well, you can find it in several places, actually. If you go to Tumblr House, TUMBLAR.com, you'll see a big selection of my essays, etc., elsewhere on the internet, and also some they've republished. They have all of my books for sale. My latest book is Blessed Emperor Charles, the legacy, or Blessed Charles of Austria, rather, the legacy of a Holy Emperor. You get that from Tumblr House and publisher's Tan, or, of course, from the Sons of the Widow at Amazon. Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
It's okay.
The podcast you will find, it's called Off the Menu. It's usually done every week, but we took a break for the month of July. And that you will find on the YouTube Tumblr House channel. You can find my stuff also at the European Conservative, at Catholicism.org. You can find a lot of stuff I've done also at Crisis Magazine. Oh, and I also write now for 1 Peter 5. I've just had an article come out this past week on hyper-papalism, which you might find of some interest. Let me see. I think that about does it. I'm working right now on, I have to crank out 2 books this year. Say a prayer I don't go crazy. One is A Life of Empress Zita, Karl's wife, who is a servant of God. She's not a blessed yet. She's a servant of God. Interestingly, his feast day is their wedding day. So presumably, if she is beatified, it'll be a joint feast. I'm also working on a collection of their son, Archduke Otto's writings about America. So,
how fun to dance and to play inside of history and to make books and do podcasts. It's a wonderful, wonderful workflow you got there, Charles. It was great meeting you again. Tim, anything you want to add?
Yeah, God bless you, Charles. I want to talk to you about Puritan's Empire sometime on my channel. Maybe the 3 of us can hang out sometime on my channel sometime soon.
You let me know. I'd love to be of course, I would be a backseater at that point to contribute a little bit of my naive curiosity to the. You guys are learned masters of the subjects, so I'm just happy to be here and contribute in any way, shape, or form. Thank you both so much.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you both for having me. And, again, to say something, to give a phrase that Father Martin surely knew because it was the standard of the Irish schools of his childhood. Keep the faith.
Amen.
Certainly will. Thank you so much, Charles. Thank you, Tim. I will talk to you both soon, and away we go.
God bless.
Take care.